Austin, Texas, December 6, 1991. Christmas lights glowed across the city as families prepared for the holidays. For most, it was just another Friday night. But inside a small yogurt shop on Anderson Lane, 4 teenage girls were closing up for the evening. Jennifer Harbison and her best friend Eliza Thomas, both 17, Jennifer's younger sister Sarah, 15, and their friend Amy Ayers, only 13. What should have ended as an ordinary night with plans for a sleepover instead turned into horror. After midnight, firefighters responding to a blaze inside the shop discovered all 4 girls dead. The fire had been set deliberately. The tragedy shocked Austin. Fear gripped the city, and questions spread quickly. Who could do this? And why? More than 30 years later, the yogurt shop murders remain one of Texas's darkest and most haunting unsolved cases. This case still raises so many questions. Do you think this was a crime of cruelty or a desperate act of a troubled mind? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading every single one. Don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories every week. The 4 victims of the yogurt shop murders were ordinary girls, full of promise and innocence. 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison was a senior at Lanier High School. Friends described her as bright, determined, and planning to study veterinary medicine. She often worked evening shifts at the yogurt shop, saving money for her future. Her younger sister, Sarah Harbison, was just 15 years old, a high school sophomore. She was close to Jennifer and looked up to her. That night, Sarah went to the shop so that she could ride home with her sister after closing. Working alongside Jennifer was her friend and co-worker, Eliza Thomas. Also 17, Eliza was known for being dependable and responsible. She often helped Jennifer on closing shifts, and that Friday night was no different. The youngest of the group was 13-year-old Amy Ayers. She was spending the night with Sarah for a planned sleepover. Amy had tagged along to the yogurt shop while she waited with Sarah for Jennifer and Eliza to finish work. That evening, the girls served customers, cleaned the store, and prepared to close for the night. Witnesses later confirmed they were seen alive shortly before midnight. Nothing appeared unusual, but sometime between 11:00 p.m. and midnight, everything changed. The final moments inside the shop have never been fully reconstructed. What is known comes only from the evidence left behind. Shortly after midnight, smoke was seen rising from the building. Firefighters responded to what was first thought to be a routine blaze. When they entered the yogurt shop, they made a discovery that would shock Austin for decades. Inside, they found the bodies of all 4 girls. Each had been bound and gagged. They had been shot. Evidence suggested that Amy Ayers, the youngest, may have still been alive when the fire was set. She had suffered both a gunshot wound and burns. Investigators determined that the store had been robbed and the fire deliberately set in an attempt to destroy evidence. But the level of violence inflicted on the girls suggested far more than a simple robbery gone wrong. The brutality of the crime stunned even veteran detectives. By morning, word of the killings had spread across Austin. The city, known for its college town atmosphere and family-friendly image, was gripped by fear. Parents who had always trusted their children to go out at night now questioned their safety. 4 young lives, Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy, had been cut short in an act of unspeakable violence. Their futures stolen in an instant, and the unanswered question of who committed this crime would hang over Austin, not for days, not for years, but for decades to come. In the early hours of December 7, 1991, the investigation into the yogurt shop murders began. The scene firefighters handed over to police was one of devastation. The inside of the yogurt shop was blackened by smoke, its walls charred, the air thick with the acrid smell of fire. But what shocked investigators most was what had survived the flames. 4 girls, Jennifer and Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Amy Ayers, had been murdered. Their bodies bore signs of being bound and gagged. All had been shot. Evidence later suggested that Amy, just 13 years old, may have still been alive when the fire was set. From the beginning, it was clear that this was no ordinary crime. The fire had been intentionally started, likely to cover the killer's tracks. But instead of erasing the evidence, it complicated the work of investigators. Much of the physical evidence had been destroyed by the flames and by the water used to extinguish them. Detectives were left with a compromised crime scene. Still, forensic teams moved carefully through the ruins. They recovered bullet casings, bindings, and other fragments that had survived. They documented signs that money was missing from the register and that the shop had been ransacked. News of the murders spread quickly. By morning, the city of Austin was on edge. Families locked their doors, and parents kept their children closer than ever. Reporters crowded near the scene as police faced mounting pressure to bring answers. The Austin Police Department launched what would become one of the largest investigations in the city's history. Dozens of officers were assigned. Detectives worked long hours, chasing leads, collecting tips, and interviewing witnesses. Several people recalled being inside the store before closing. Some described seeing young men in the area that night. Others reported suspicious behavior in the parking lot. But none of these accounts led to a clear suspect. What investigators did know was chilling. Someone had entered a small yogurt shop, subdued 4 young girls, executed them, set fire to the building, and escaped into the night without being caught. The city waited anxiously for answers, but as days turned to weeks and weeks into months, the case grew more complicated. Rumors spread, suspects came and went, and what began as an urgent manhunt was becoming one of the most difficult cases Austin had ever faced. The yogurt shop murders had launched a massive investigation. But in those first critical days, the truth remained out of reach. The killers were still unknown, and Austin, shaken to its core, was left to grieve and to fear what might come next. In the months and years after the yogurt shop murders, investigators searched desperately for suspects. Tips poured in, but many led nowhere. Dozens of people were questioned. Several young men came under suspicion, but clear, physical evidence remained scarce. The pressure on detectives was enormous. The city of Austin demanded justice. Families of the victims pleaded for answers. Yet the fire that destroyed so much of the crime scene left investigators struggling to build a case that could hold. By the mid-1990s, police had turned their attention to 4 young men: Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Wellborn. All had been teenagers at the time of the murders. Their connection to the crime was built largely on interviews, suspicion, and circumstantial evidence, not on forensic proof. Maurice Pierce first came to police attention in 1991 when he was found with a .22 caliber handgun, the same caliber used in the murders, but testing did not link his weapon to the crime, and Pierce was released. His friends, Wellborn, Springsteen, and Scott, were also questioned, but initially no charges were filed. Years later, the focus shifted. Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott were brought in for repeated interrogations. Eventually, both men gave confessions, but those statements were obtained after long and difficult questioning. Critics later described the confessions as inconsistent, unreliable, and possibly coerced. Still, in the absence of physical evidence, prosecutors pushed forward. In 1999, Robert Springsteen was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. 2 years later, Michael Scott was convicted and given life in prison. For a time, it seemed the case had been solved, but the foundation of those convictions was fragile. The evidence against both men rested almost entirely on their words, with little else to support them. As forensic science advanced, new DNA testing was performed on evidence from the crime scene. The results did not match Springsteen, Scott, or the other 2 young men once under suspicion. Instead, the DNA belonged to an unknown male. This discovery shook the case to its core. In 2006, appellate courts overturned the convictions, citing constitutional issues and doubts about the confessions. By 2009, both Springsteen and Scott were released from prison. What had once looked like closure for the victims' families collapsed into heartbreak and frustration. After nearly 2 decades, the yogurt shop murders returned to where they had started, unsolved. The false leads and failed prosecutions left lasting scars on the families, on the justice system, and on the city of Austin itself. Confidence in law enforcement was shaken, and the question that haunted investigators in 1991 still lingered. Who was responsible for the brutal killing of 4 young girls? This case still raises so many questions. Do you think this was a crime of cruelty or a desperate act of a troubled mind? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading every single one. Don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories every week. By the early 2000s, advances in forensic science brought new attention to the yogurt shop murders. For years, the case had relied almost entirely on confessions, but DNA testing now offered the possibility of real answers. Evidence collected from the crime scene was re-examined using improved technology. What the results revealed shook the foundation of the prosecutions. A DNA profile found on one of the victims did not match Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, or any of the other young men police had once pursued. Instead, it belonged to an unknown male. This discovery raised critical questions. If neither Springsteen nor Scott could be linked through DNA, how reliable were their confessions? And if they were not responsible, then who was? In 2006, appellate courts overturned both convictions, ruling that the trials had violated the defendant's constitutional rights, including the improper use of each man's statements against the other. By 2009, prosecutors dropped the charges, and Springsteen and Scott were released after spending years behind bars. For the victims' families, the reversal was devastating. What had once seemed like justice turned out to be a false resolution. Once again, the case was open, and the true killers remained unidentified. Investigators turned their focus back to the unknown DNA. They searched state and national databases, hoping for a match. But no match was ever found. The profile remained a mystery, a haunting reminder that someone else had been there that night. The yogurt shop murders officially returned to cold case status. Detectives continued to pursue leads, but as the years passed, answers grew harder to find. The surviving families of Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy were left waiting, carrying the weight of a crime that had stolen their daughters, sisters, and friends. Nearly 3 decades later, the DNA evidence remains one of the most important keys to solving the case. It is a fragment of truth pointing toward the killer's identity. But until it is matched, the case will remain unsolved. The yogurt shop murders, once thought to be resolved, became one of Austin's most enduring mysteries. And hope for justice now rests on a single piece of evidence, a strand of DNA, waiting to tell its story. The yogurt shop murders left a mark on Austin that has never fully healed. In the days following December 6, 1991, grief spread across the city. Vigils were held, Flowers and messages were left outside the charred remains of the shop, and the victims' names became forever etched in Austin's memory. For the families of Jennifer and Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Amy Ayers, the pain was immeasurable. Their daughters had been taken in an act of violence that defied comprehension. Over the decades that followed, each family endured uncertainty, false hopes, and the heartbreak of wrongful convictions that were later overturned. The community, too, carried the weight of the tragedy. Austin, often seen as a safe and family-friendly city, was shaken by the brutality of the crime. Parents grew more cautious, and the murders became a symbol of innocence lost. For law enforcement, the case became a lasting test of credibility. The reliance on disputed confessions and the collapse of two high-profile convictions left deep scars on the Austin Police Department and the Travis County District Attorney's Office. Public confidence was shaken, and questions about how the case was handled lingered long after the trials ended. And yet, despite setbacks, the case has never been forgotten. Detectives have continued to pursue leads, and the DNA profile recovered from the crime scene remains a beacon of hope, a clue that could one day reveal the killers. More than 3 decades later, the yogurt shop murders remain unsolved. The store where the crime occurred is long gone, replaced by new businesses. But the memory of what happened there endures. Each year, on the anniversary of the murders, friends, family, and community members gather to remember Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy. Their lives, full of promise, are the reason the case has never been closed in the hearts of those who loved them. The yogurt shop murders are more than an unsolved crime. They are a story of lives stolen, a community scarred, and a justice system still searching for answers. Austin still waits. The families still wait. And justice for 4 young girls remains unfinished. This case still raises so many questions. Do you think this was a crime of cruelty or a desperate act of a troubled mind? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading every single one. Don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories every week.